My name is Alara Meadows, and for 72 years, the tides of life have washed me along the shores of Seabreeze Cove, here in Maine. My earliest memories are scented with salt and pine, the cries of gulls, and the steady, comforting rhythm of the ocean. I married Arthur, a fisherman with eyes the color of the sea on a calm day, and our little cottage, nestled amongst wild roses and sturdy oaks, became my canvas. I painted it with love, with the aroma of baking bread, with the quiet hum of a life dedicated to nurturing, first Arthur, then our son, Daniel. After Arthur sailed on his final voyage into the eternal sea, leaving me with a heart full of memories and hands that still yearned to mend his nets, I found solace in my garden. It was there, amongst the patient bloom of perennials and the stubborn tenacity of herbs, that I felt closest to the earth and to him. Life, however, has a way of shifting its currents. Daniel, grown and with a family of his own, his wife, Chloe, and their bright, inquisitive son, Leo, invited me to live with them after my knees began to protest too fiercely against the damp chill of the old cottage, and the garden grew too vast for my slowing hands. Their home was newer, larger, closer to town, filled with the bustling energy of a young family. I brought with me a few cherished belongings, a heart full of hope for this new chapter, and the quiet expectation of belonging. The shift was subtle at first, like the turning of the tide you only notice when the waterline has crept significantly up the shore. It was in the way my favorite teacup would be moved to the back of the cupboard, or how my suggestions for Leo's little coughs were met with polite, dismissive smiles. Then came the evening that settled a different kind of chill into my bones, one no warm shawl could ward off. We were at dinner. Roast chicken, a little dry, and mashed potatoes that Chloe had insisted on making with skim milk, leaving them tasting faintly of good intentions rather than comfort. Leo was chattering about a boat he'd seen in the harbor, his small hands gesturing animatedly. Daniel was quiet, scrolling through something on his phone, a habit that had become as much a part of him as his father's old watch on his wrist. Alara, Chloe began, her voice carefully modulated, the way one speaks when correcting a slightly errant but ultimately harmless pet. I was thinking, perhaps you could manage the grocery shopping from next week? It would free me up for Leo's art class, and, well, she paused, spooning more potatoes onto Leo's plate. It's just that with you here now, there are more demands on my time, and it's important everyone contributes what they can. Her words weren't overtly cruel, not like a sudden squall. They were more like a persistent, cold drizzle, seeping in, making everything feel damp and heavy. You eat, but don't help, was the unspoken echo from the story provided, a feeling I recognized in that moment. My hands, resting in my lap, felt the familiar ache of arthritis, a dull throb that made gripping a shopping basket, let alone navigating the crowded aisles of Miller's General Store, a daunting prospect. I had been helping, of course, in the small ways I still could, folding laundry until my fingers stiffened, shelling peas for dinner, reading to Leo when Chloe was busy, mending a tear in Daniel's favorite sweater. But these were quiet contributions, easily overlooked, unlike the visible, quantifiable act of wrestling with grocery bags. I looked at Daniel. He didn't lift his eyes from his phone. Not a flicker of understanding, no gentle, "Mom's finding it a bit much these days, Chloe. We can manage." Just the faint blue light of the screen reflecting in his glasses, his silence a heavy blanket smothering the unspoken plea in my heart. Leo, sensitive as always to the subtle shifts in atmosphere, fell quiet, his gaze moving from his mother to me, a tiny furrow in his brow. I managed a small, tight smile. "Of course, dear. If that would be helpful." My voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else, someone more capable, less diminished. I picked up my fork, but the chicken suddenly seemed too tough to cut, the potatoes too bland to swallow. The taste of erasure was far more potent than any spice or lack thereof. Later that night, cocooned in the unfamiliar floral duvet of the guest room, a room that felt more like a polite afterthought than a place of welcome, I lay awake, listening to the house settle around me. The wind, a familiar friend from my years by the sea, whispered secrets at the window pane, but here it sounded mournful, lost. From downstairs, I could hear the murmur of the television, punctuated by Chloe's occasional laugh and Daniel's low responses. They were sharing their evening, their life, a life in which my role seemed to be shrinking, fading like an old photograph left in the sun. I didn't weep. Tears felt like a surrender I wasn't ready to make. Instead, a quiet ache settled in my chest, a profound sense of loneliness that was all the more acute for being surrounded by family. I thought of Arthur, of his calloused hands gently tending to my rose bushes, of the way he'd hum off-key while fixing something in the cottage, his presence a steady anchor. I remembered Daniel as a boy, all scraped knees and boundless energy, how I'd stay up late helping him with school projects, my heart swelling with pride at his small triumphs. I had poured my life into them, into building a home, a family. Had it all been forgotten so easily? Was I now just an extra mouth, a set of aging hands that could no longer keep up? The question hung in the quiet darkness of the room, heavy and unanswered. But beneath the sorrow, a tiny, resilient seed of something else began to stir, a quiet resolve, as tenacious as the wildflowers that pushed their way through the cracks in the old seawall. The days that followed were draped in a polite, strained normalcy. I made coffee each morning, the aroma mingling with the faint, persistent scent of Chloe's expensive air freshener. I folded the brightly colored laundry, my fingers moving a little slower each day. I read stories to Leo, his warm little body pressed against my side, a small comfort in the growing chill. But a subtle shift had occurred within me, a drawing inward, a conservation of spirit. I spoke less, observed more. 2 weeks later, Daniel and Chloe announced they were going to Portland for a long weekend. A little getaway, just the two of us, Chloe had said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. You'll be fine with Leo, won't you, Alara? Mrs. Henderson next door can pop in if you need anything. I wasn't invited. The unspoken message was clear. I was the caregiver, not part of the just the two of us. Daniel avoided my gaze, busying himself with packing the car. The morning they left, the house felt strangely quiet, echoing with their absence. Leo was at a friend's for a playdate. It was then, in the silence, that I moved. There was no dramatic flourish, no slamming of doors. I packed one small, worn suitcase, the one Arthur and I had taken on our 20th anniversary trip to Quebec. Inside, I placed a few sets of clothes, my well-thumbed book of poetry, Arthur's old silver-cased watch that still ticked faithfully, and my small, leather-bound gardening journal, its pages filled with notes on soil and seasons and dried flowers pressed between its leaves. I wrote a brief note for Leo, telling him Grandma loved him very much and would see him soon, tucking it beside his favorite stuffed bear. On the polished mahogany table in the hall, next to a crystal vase holding 3 perfectly arranged, store-bought lilies, I placed the house key. The local bus sighed to a halt at the stop near the town green. My niece protested as I climbed aboard, the suitcase bumping against my leg. I found a seat by the window, watching as the familiar streets of Seabreeze Cove slid by, each one holding a memory. The Willow's assisted living was on the far side of town, a neat, unassuming building painted a pale, hopeful yellow. It wasn't grand, but the windows were clean, and a row of cheerful pansies lined the walkway. The administrator, a kind woman named Mrs. Albright with gentle eyes and a reassuring smile, processed my paperwork with quiet efficiency. She didn't ask too many questions about why I was there alone, perhaps sensing the story unspoken. My room was small, furnished with a single bed, a dresser, and a chair by a window that looked out onto a neatly kept lawn. It smelled faintly of lavender polish, and the collective scent of lives lived within its walls. That first night, sitting on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, a wave of desolation washed over me. Had I made a mistake? Was this to be the final chapter? A small room, a view of a manicured lawn, the polite company of strangers? But then, as the moon cast its silvery light through the window, that tiny, resilient seed within me stirred again. This wasn't an ending, it was an intermission, a quiet space to gather my strength, to listen to the voice I had silenced for too long. The next morning, after a breakfast of lukewarm oatmeal and weak tea in the communal dining room, I felt a familiar restlessness. My hands, though aching, yearned for purpose. I walked into Seabreeze Cove, the salty air a welcome balm. My steps, hesitant at first, grew steadier as I neared the old maritime district, its clapboard buildings weathered by years of sun and sea. There, overlooking the bustling harbor, was a brass plaque I knew well, Finch and Associates Solicitors. Mr. Alastair Finch had been Arthur's closest friend since boyhood. They'd learned to sail together, shared youthful dreams, and later, Mr. Finch had guided us through the legalities of life. Wills, deeds, the careful planning for a future that Arthur, with his quiet foresight, knew he might not fully share. His office was on the second floor, reached by a narrow, creaking staircase. The scent of old books, lemon polish, and the faint, briny tang of the sea greeted me like an old friend. Mr. Finch, his silver hair neatly combed, his eyes as kind and astute as I remembered, rose from behind his large oak desk. "Alara," he said, his voice warm with genuine surprise and pleasure. "What a welcome sight. Come in, my dear, come in. Tea?" He ushered me to a comfortable leather armchair, and soon, a steaming cup of Earl Grey, just the way I liked it, was warming my hands. We spoke for a while of ordinary things, the changing weather, the latest news from the harbor, a shared memory of Arthur's legendary bad luck with lobster pots. Then, a comfortable silence settled between us. "Alastair," I began, my voice a little unsteady, "I need to ask you about the cottage, about Daniel's house." He leaned back, his gaze gentle. Yes. The house on Chestnut Lane. Arthur, before he passed, did he make any specific arrangements for it? For me. Mr. Finch nodded slowly. He rose and walked to a tall filing cabinet, its brass handles gleaming softly. He returned with a thick, buff-colored folder, laying it on the desk between us. Arthur was a man who loved deeply Alara. And he was a practical man. He wanted to ensure you were always secure, always had a place that was unequivocally yours. He opened the folder, his long, careful fingers retrieving a crisp document. He slid it across the polished surface of the desk towards me. "This is the deed to the property on Chestnut Lane." After his diagnosis, Arthur came to see me. He was very clear. He wanted the house solely in your name. No ambiguity, no possibility of future complications. My breath caught. I stared at the document, my name clearly typed, Arthur's familiar, slightly shaky signature at the bottom, witnessed and notarized. Dated June 12th, nearly 20 years ago. The house where Daniel and Chloe lived, the house from which I had quietly removed myself, feeling like an interloper, was mine. It had been mine all along. A wave of emotions washed over me. Shock, a pang of sorrow for Arthur's quiet, protective love that I hadn't fully grasped, and then a slow, rising tide of strength. I don't think I ever truly understood, I whispered, my fingers tracing Arthur's signature. Daniel always handled the property taxes, the insurance. I just assumed. Arthur instructed me to ensure all legal and financial obligations were discreetly managed through a trust he established for that purpose, drawing from his fisherman's pension and investments. He didn't want you burdened with the details, only with the peace of mind of ownership, Alastair explained gently. He said to me, "Alara built our home with her heart and hands, Alastair. She should never have to ask permission to live in her own sanctuary or feel like a guest under her own roof." Tears welled in my eyes, not of sadness this time, but of a profound, bittersweet gratitude. Arthur, even in the face of his own mortality, had been my steadfast protector. I looked at Alastair, a new resolve hardening within me. Alistair, I said, my voice clearer now, firmer. I want to sell it. He didn't look surprised. He simply nodded, his expression one of quiet understanding. As is your right, Alara. We can begin the process whenever you're ready. Quietly, I presume. Yes, I said. Very quietly. I would prefer Daniel and Chloe learn of it, through official channels, after the sale is complete. Alistair Finch, a man of discretion and integrity, merely inclined his head. Consider it done, my dear. Leaving his office, the sea air felt different, sharper, cleaner. The weight on my shoulders, the one I hadn't fully realized I'd been carrying, felt lighter. I wasn't just an old woman who had outstayed her welcome. I was Alara Meadows, owner of my own destiny, keeper of Arthur's enduring love. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like my own to choose. Life at the Willows settled into a gentle rhythm. I found a sunny spot on my windowsill for a few pots of herbs, rosemary for remembrance, thyme for courage, and basil, whose cheerful scent always reminded me of summer kitchens and Arthur's attempts at making pesto. I started spending time in the communal sunroom, a bright space filled with mismatched, comfortable armchairs and the murmur of quiet conversations. It was there I met Mrs. Agnes Periwinkle. Agnes was a tiny woman with a cloud of snow-white hair and eyes that sparkled with a mischievous, indomitable spirit. Despite the walker, she navigated with surprising speed. She had a laugh like wind chimes and a story that echoed my own in its quiet sorrows. Her son and daughter-in-law, after her husband passed, had gently suggested a smaller, more manageable living situation for her. Manageable for them, you mean? Agnes had said with a wry twist of her lips, her knitting needles clicking a steady rhythm. Told me I was becoming a bit forgetful, a bit of a worry. Funny, I don't remember forgetting how to make their favorite apple pie for 30 years. We found solace in each other's company, Agnes and I. We'd share pots of tea, her tales of a life spent running a small-town bakery mingling with my memories of Seabreeze Cove's tides and seasons. We understood the unspoken ache of being deemed surplus to requirements by the very lives we had nurtured. It's like they put you on a shelf, dear, Agnes said one afternoon, her gaze distant, a beloved old figurine, pretty to look at occasionally, but not really part of the daily dusting anymore. Her words resonated deeply, strengthening my quiet resolve. Months drifted by like autumn leaves. Alistair Finch handled the sale of the Chestnut Lane house with his customary efficiency and discretion. The property market in Seabreeze Cove was buoyant, and a young family, eager for a home with a garden, made a good offer. One crisp October morning, Alistair called. "It's done, Alara," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "The sale is complete. The funds have been transferred to the account we set up. The new owners will take possession at the end of the month. The necessary notifications will be sent to Daniel and Chloe today." I thanked him, my heart a mixture of trepidation and a strange, quiet peace. Then I waited. It didn't take long. 3 days later, my small room phone jangled, startling me from my reading. It was Chloe. Her voice, usually so carefully controlled, was shrill, laced with disbelief and a raw, ragged anger. "Alara, what have you done?" "We received a letter, some legal notice. It says the house has been sold. Our home. You can't do this to us." I held the receiver a little away from my ear, taking a slow, steadying breath. "Chloe," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It was my home. Arthur left it to me, solely in my name, many years ago. But we've lived here for years. We've paid the bills, maintained it. This is Leo's home," she sputtered, her indignation warring with a dawning panic. "I am aware of that, Chloe. And for many years, you lived there without the burden of a mortgage, in a house that was mine. I never asked for rent. I only asked for a little respect, a little kindness in my own home." My words were not harsh, but they carried the weight of unspoken truths. There was a choke sound on the other end, then a click as she hung up. I sat for a long moment, the silence of my small room pressing in. There was no triumph, only a profound sense of sadness for what had been lost, and what could never be reclaimed. The next evening, the phone rang again. This time, it was Daniel. His voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual confident tone. He sounded like the lost little boy I remembered comforting after a nightmare. "Mom," he whispered. "Mom, what's happening?" She's beside herself. "We have to be out in 30 days? Where will we go?" Leo. "Mom, it's a disaster." I listened patiently as he spoke, his words tumbling out, a torrent of fear, confusion, and a dawning, painful understanding. When he finally fell silent, I spoke, my voice gentle but unwavering. "Daniel," I said, "this wasn't done to punish you. It was done because I needed to reclaim something I had lost, my peace, my dignity. For a long time, I felt like a shadow in that house, in my own home. But why didn't you talk to us? We could have, I don't know, worked something out." His voice was laced with a desperate bewilderment. "Perhaps we could have, Daniel." But when Chloe spoke to me that evening at dinner, when she implied I wasn't contributing, and you said nothing, something shifted within me. I realized I couldn't stay where I wasn't truly seen or valued for who I am, not just for what I could do. A long pause stretched between us, filled with the crackle of the phone line and the unspoken weight of years. Is there any way to undo it, Mom?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. I closed my eyes for a moment, picturing his face, the worry lines that now etched his forehead. "No, Daniel," I said softly. "The house is sold. But this isn't about the house, not really. It's about me finding my own way again on my own terms. You'll find a new place, Daniel. You're resourceful. Perhaps this is a chance for you and Chloe to build something new on a foundation of clearer understanding." He was silent for a long time. Then, a quiet "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have." "I'm so sorry." "I know, Daniel," I said. And in that moment, I did. The apology was a start, a tiny crack of light in a long darkened room. But my path was set now. "You need to find your own harbor now, son." "As do I." The money from the sale of the Chestnut Lane house sat in the bank account Alistair had arranged. It felt less like a windfall and more like a responsibility, a quiet weight of potential. I had no desire for cruises or fancy clothes. The idea of using it for mere personal comfort felt hollow. Agnes Periwinkle's words often echoed in my mind, like they put you on a shelf, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, what I needed to do. I didn't want another small room in a place where days were measured by medication schedules and lukewarm meals. I wanted a home, a real home, not just for myself, but for others who, like me, had found themselves adrift in their later years. Alistair, bless his understanding heart, helped me search. We looked at several properties, but none felt quite right. Then, one blustery November afternoon, he drove me to a place a little way out of Seabreeze Cove, perched on a gentle rise overlooking a stretch of wild, windswept coastline. A distant lighthouse blinked its steady, reassuring signal across the gray Atlantic waters. It was an old sea captain's house, rambling and sturdy, with wide porches and windows that seemed to drink in the light, even on an overcast day. It was called Sea Haven. It had been empty for some years, a little neglected, its paint faded, the garden overgrown with tenacious coastal grasses. But it had good bones, a welcoming hearth, and a view that spoke of endurance and timeless beauty. "This is it, Alistair," I said, a sense of rightness settling over me. "This is the place." The agent, a brisk young woman named Ms. Albright, no relation to the kindly administrator at the Willows, though the coincidence made me smile, had looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "It needs a lot of work, Mrs. Meadows." "Are you sure? Most clients your age are looking to downsize, simplify." "I am simplifying, my dear," I replied, a gentle smile playing on my lips. "I'm simplifying life down to what truly matters, a warm hearth, good company, and a view of the sea. I bought Sea Haven that week. And then the real work began. I didn't want to create an institution. I wanted to cultivate a home. I hired a local craftsman, a quiet, skilled man named Thomas, whose own mother had spent her last years in a sterile, impersonal facility. When he understood my vision for Sea Haven, not a care home, but a community, a place of mutual support and dignity, he offered to work at a reduced rate, his quiet way of honoring his mother's memory. We painted the walls in warm, inviting colors, soft blues, creamy yellows, and gentle sea greens. We sanded and polished the old wooden floors until they gleamed. I scoured antique shops and local markets for comfortable furniture, sturdy tables, and cheerful rugs. The large kitchen, with its old-fashioned pantry, became the heart of the house. And the garden, oh, the garden! It was my special project. With Thomas's help, we cleared the overgrown weeds, mended the trellises, and planted hardy coastal flowers, fragrant herbs, and a small vegetable patch. Beneath the new sign that read Sea Haven, I had Thomas engrave a simple, heartfelt motto, where every soul finds safe harbor and gentle tides. Agnes Periwinkle was the first to join me. When she saw her sun-filled room, with its view of the restless sea and a small writing desk I'd found just for her, she wept. "Alara, my dear," she'd whispered, her hand gripping mine, "you've built a lighthouse for us lost old boats." Slowly, Sea Haven began to fill. There was Mr. Henderson, a retired schoolmaster with a passion for history and a seemingly endless supply of stories. And Mrs. Carmichael, a former librarian whose quiet demeanor hid a sharp wit and a love for detective novels. We weren't residents or patients. We were a household. We shared meals, chores, stories, and laughter. We looked after each other. If someone was feeling unwell, another would brew tea or read aloud. We played cards in the evenings, tended the garden together, and sometimes, on clear nights, we'd sit on the porch, wrapped in old quilts, watching the stars and listening to the eternal song of the ocean. One afternoon, as I was kneading dough for our supper bread, the scent of yeast and warm flour filling the kitchen, I paused. I looked around at the comfortable clutter, the gently simmering pot on the stove, the sound of Mr. Henderson reading poetry in the sunroom. A deep, quiet contentment settled in my heart. I hadn't just reclaimed my own life. I had, in some small way, helped to rekindle the light in others. This was Arthur's true legacy, not just a house, but the enduring power of a loving, protective heart, a legacy I was now privileged to share. I hadn't kept a ledger of my past generosities towards Daniel and Chloe. The accounting that mattered now was the warmth in this house, the shared smiles, the quiet dignity we had all rediscovered. That was a currency beyond measure. Nearly a year had passed since Sea Haven opened its doors. The coastal garden was thriving, a riot of color and fragrance, testament to shared efforts and the resilience of nature. The rhythm of our lives had settled into a comfortable cadence, marked by the tides, the changing seasons, and the simple joys of companionship. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves drifted on the breeze, I was on the porch, mending one of Mr. Henderson's favorite cardigans, when a car I didn't recognize pulled into the gravel driveway. A man emerged, his shoulders slightly stooped, his movements hesitant. It was Daniel. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, his hair showing more silver at the temples. There was a weariness about him that hadn't been there before, but also a quiet humility. He approached the porch slowly, his gaze taking in the cheerful window boxes, the sound of Agnes's laughter drifting from an open window. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet, almost uncertain. I put down my mending. "Daniel, come, sit down." I gestured to the wicker chair beside mine. He sat, his hands clasped loosely between his knees. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the distant cry of a gull and the rustle of leaves in the old oak tree. "This place," he began, looking around, "it's beautiful. Peaceful. Yes, I said. It is. Chloe and I were divorced, he said, his eyes on the distant horizon. It was for the best. We were heading in different directions for a long time. Losing the house, it just brought everything to a head. He paused. I'm living in a small apartment now, closer to my work. Leo stays with me on weekends. He asks about you. I felt a pang in my heart at the mention of Leo, my bright, inquisitive grandson. How is he? He's good. Resilient, like you. A faint smile touched his lips. Mom, I came to say I'm sorry. Truly sorry. For not seeing, for not understanding. For not being the son you deserved. His voice was thick with an emotion I hadn't heard from him in years. I took so much for granted. Your kindness, your presence. I failed you. I looked at him, at the genuine remorse in his eyes. The anger, the deep hurt I had carried for so long, had softened, weathered by time and the healing balm of my new life. Growth takes time, Daniel, I said gently. For all of us. Sometimes we have to lose our way to find a truer path. He nodded, absorbing my words. Is there anything I can do? To help here, I mean? The garden looks like a lot of work. Or repairs, maybe? He looked around, a hopeful, uncertain expression on his face. I considered his offer. Sea Haven didn't need his guilt, or his charity. But perhaps he needed a way to reconnect, to mend the broken threads, not for my sake, but for his own. The seawall at the edge of the property took a bit of a beating in the last storm, I said. It could use some reinforcing before winter sets in, if you have the time and the inclination. A flicker of relief, of gratitude, crossed his face. I'd like that, Mom. I'd like that very much. He stayed for tea, and Agnes, with her usual forthright charm, engaged him in a lively conversation about the best way to grow tomatoes, completely oblivious to any past family dramas. As he was leaving, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the lawn, he turned back. Thank you, Mom, he said. For everything. For showing me what really matters. I simply smiled. Take care of yourself, Daniel. And give Leo a hug from his grandma. I watched him drive away, a quiet sense of closure settling over me. The path to reconciliation is often a long and winding one, built not on grand gestures, but on small acts of understanding, forgiveness, and the willingness to see each other anew. Later that evening, I sat on the porch, a warm shawl around my shoulders, watching the lighthouse beams sweep across the darkening sea. The air was crisp, filled with the promise of winter, but inside Sea Haven, there was warmth, laughter, and the gentle hum of lives interwoven. I thought of Arthur, of his quiet, steadfast love that had, in its own way, led me to this new beginning. This journey hadn't been about revenge, or even about proving a point. It had been about reclaiming my own voice, my own worth, about understanding that true belonging comes not from being tolerated, but from being cherished, and from cherishing oneself enough to build a sanctuary when the old one crumbles. The tides of life had indeed shifted, but they had carried me to a shore where peace bloomed, even in the autumn of my years. And as the first stars pricked the velvet sky, I knew, with a quiet certainty that resonated deep within my soul, that I was finally home. Not just in a house, but within myself. The sound of the ocean was a gentle lullaby, a timeless reminder that even after the storm, there is always the calm and the enduring light that guides us back to harbor.